Wow, you guys have really sent us down a rabbit hole this time with these writings from Jiddu Krishnamurti.
Yeah.
Especially these excerpts from This Enlightened Oneself,
Yeah.
Freedom, Meditation, Reality. It's heady stuff, but honestly, I'm excited to dive in.
I think what strikes me about Krishnamurti is that he doesn't lay out a neat little path
Right.
or give us a set of rules. He's more about throwing down a gauntlet,
Right.
challenging each of us to become a light unto ourselves.
That's the part that I kind of get stuck on, a light into oneself.
Right.
It sounds beautiful, but what's the practical application? Like, how does that actually play out in my life?
Well, he ties that idea of being a light to the concept of true freedom.
Okay.
Not freedom in the sense of doing whatever you want,
No.
but freedom from needing that external validation,
Mhm.
from being chained to attachments or always chasing the next experience.
And then there's this whole thing about being free from thought.
Right.
I kept bumping into that phrase in the material you sent.
Yeah.
In fact, it even says freedom from the very structure of thought is to be a light to oneself.
Right.
Isn't that a bit of a paradox?
It is.
How can we be free from thinking when our thoughts are, well, kind of what make us human?
It's definitely a challenging idea.
Yeah,
He's not saying we should aim to be mindless.
right.
It's more about understanding that our thoughts are often driven by past experiences and conditioning, can actually block us from seeing things clearly.
Okay.
We get so caught up in our own heads, we miss the reality that's right in front of us.
So it's like our thoughts create a filter that distorts our perception of the world. Instead of seeing things as they are, we see them through the lens of our preconceptions and biases.
Right.
Can you give me a real-world example of what this interference of thought might look like?
Sure. Let's say you're scrolling through social media.
Okay.
And you see someone posting pictures of their amazing vacation.
Uh-huh.
It's easy to get caught in the comparison trap thinking, my life is so boring, or why can't I have that?
Oh, yeah.
That's the interference of thought kicking in. Instead of simply appreciating their experience,
Right.
you're letting your thoughts create a sense of lack and dissatisfaction in your own life.
Wow, that's so relatable. I definitely fall into that trap more often than I'd like to admit.
Right.
It's like we end up comparing our behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel.
Exactly. And Krishnamurti would argue that this kind of comparison keeps us trapped in a cycle of suffering.
Right.
It prevents us from appreciating the beauty and richness of our own unique lives.
So how do we break free from this thought trap? That's where meditation comes in, right?
That's one of the ways.
But Krishnamurti had his own unique take on what meditation is and isn't.
He wasn't a fan of meditation as a way to zone out
Right.
or force your mind to be blank.
Yeah.
For him, meditation was about cultivating a state of deep stillness and attention.
Mm-hmm.
It's about becoming the observer of your thoughts,
Okay.
noticing them without getting carried away by them.
So it's more about creating a space between you and your thoughts rather than trying to silence them completely.
Exactly. He uses the analogy of a mirror.
Okay.
A dirty mirror reflects a distorted image.
Right.
But a clean, clear mirror reflects things as they truly are.
Mhm.
Meditation for him was about polishing the mirror of the mind so that we can perceive reality
Right.
without the distortions of our preconceptions and biases.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all ties together.
Good.
To be truly free to be a light unto ourselves,
Yeah.
we need to develop this ability to see clearly both within ourselves and in the world around us.
Exactly.
And meditation is a tool for cultivating that clear seeing. It's about recognizing the distortions our thoughts can create and learning to see beyond them.
You're getting it.
Okay.
And Krishnamurti would argue that this kind of clear seeing has a ripple effect.
Mhm.
As we become more aware of our own internal landscape, we become more compassionate and understanding in our relationships with others.
I'm thinking about that idea of living without comparison that came up in the material.
Right.
Krishnamurti actually asks, so in daily life, can you live without comparison? Do it once, and you will find what is implied in that. Then you throw off a tremendous burden, and when you throw off a burden that is unnecessary, you have energy.
Right.
To live without comparing myself to others, that feels radical.
It does.
Don't we compare things all the time, even for simple decisions?
He's not suggesting we become incapable of making choices or recognizing differences.
Right.
It's about becoming aware of when comparison serves us and when it becomes a source of suffering.
Can you give me an example of how comparison might be holding me back in my own life?
Imagine you're at a party
Okay.
and you find yourself constantly comparing your outfit, your conversation skills, even your perceived coolness to others.
Okay.
That's comparison rooted in the ego's need for validation.
Yeah.
And it often leads to feeling inadequate or insecure.
It's so easy to fall into that trap. You start questioning yourself, feeling self-conscious, and end up missing out on enjoying the actual experience.
Exactly, and that's where the energy drain comes in.
Right.
All that mental energy spent comparing yourself to others could be channeled into something more fulfilling and creative. Krishnamurti believed that by letting go of the burden of comparison,
Okay.
we free up energy to live more authentically and connect with others more genuinely.
This makes me think about his views on goodness.
Okay.
It seems like he had a very different perspective on what it means to be a good person.
Right.
It's not about following rules, is it?
Not at all. He saw true goodness as a state of being,
Okay.
not something you earn through good deeds or following a moral code.
Right.
He believed it arose from a deep understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
So how did Krishnamurti actually define goodness? Why is it so crucial to understand what he really meant by this word?
He saw it as a quality of being that emerges when we take full responsibility for our actions,
Okay.
recognize our interconnectedness with everything and everyone, and commit to creating a more just and compassionate world. He even said, good also means that which is beautiful. Good also means that which is holy. It is related to God to the highest principles.
That's a profound way to think about goodness.
It is.
Not about striving to be perfect,
Right.
but about recognizing the inherent goodness that exists in all of us and allowing it to flow through our actions.
You're getting it. And Krishnamurti wouldn't shy away from the fact that we live in a world full of disorder, both internally and externally.
Right.
But he also believed that true goodness comes from confronting that disorder, not turning away from it.
So it's not about pretending everything's fine,
Right.
but about facing the darkness with honesty and courage. That's a challenging idea.
It is. But Krishnamurti believed that by honestly confronting the chaos within ourselves and in the world,
Okay.
we can create the conditions for true transformation.
There's so much to unpack here, and we've only just scratched the surface.
I know.
What else does Krishnamurti say about the nature of the mind? There's that phrase ending thought that keeps popping up, and I'm not sure I fully grasp what he meant by that.
That's where Krishnamurti's ideas get really interesting.
Okay.
He wasn't advocating for a mindless existence.
Right.
He wanted us to explore the very nature of thought, to see how it can trap us in a cycle of past and future, creating the illusion of time.
Okay.
And he posed the question of whether it's possible to transcend the limitations of thought altogether.
Wait, didn't we already talk about that? I thought we were supposed to be aware of our thoughts, not try to end them completely.
You're right, it's easy to misunderstand what he meant by ending thought.
Yeah.
He wasn't suggesting we become mindless zombies.
So what was he getting at?
He wanted us to explore the nature of thought itself, to see how it can both illuminate and distort our experience of reality.
Okay.
And he suggested that by understanding the workings of the mind, we might discover a state of consciousness that transcends the limitations of thought altogether.
That's a pretty big claim. How does thought create the illusion of time?
Think about it. Our minds are constantly bouncing between memories of the past and anxieties about the future.
Right.
We rarely dwell in the present moment because our thoughts are so preoccupied with what has been and what might be.
So we're basically living in a time warp created by our own thoughts.
Exactly. And Krishnamurti believed that this psychological time is a major source of suffering.
Right.
It prevents us from fully experiencing the richness and beauty of the present moment.
Right.
He's challenging us to consider whether it's possible to break free from this mental time warp.
This raises a crucial question. Is it even possible to break free from this cycle of thought and time? What did Krishnamurti have to say about that?
He said it is possible,
Okay.
but it requires a radical shift in consciousness. It requires us to understand the nature of thought itself, to see how it creates the illusion of the self, the me that we cling to so tightly.
Okay, I'm really intrigued now. What did Krishnamurti have to say about the unconscious mind? Is it this hidden realm of wisdom that we need to tap into?
Krishnamurti didn't see the unconscious as separate from the conscious mind.
Okay.
He believed that both are shaped by our conditioning experiences and the knowledge we've accumulated over time.
Right.
It's not some pristine source of wisdom, but another part of the mind that needs to be observed and understood.
So even the unconscious is not immune to the distortions of thought.
Right. He believed we need to become aware of the entire content of our consciousness, both conscious and unconscious, if we want to experience true freedom.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that the thinker is not separate from the thought, and that this illusion of separation is at the root of much of our suffering.
So how do we even begin to unravel this knot? What did he say about ending the self? Is that even possible? And what would it mean for how we live our lives?
That's where Krishnamurti's ideas get really radical, even a little scary for some people. He argued that the self, the me, is ultimately an illusion created by thought.
Okay.
It's a collection of memories, desires, fears, and beliefs that we cling to believing they define who we are.
Living without a sense of me. That sounds terrifying. Wouldn't we lose our sense of identity, our motivation, our ability to function in the world?
It's a common fear, but Krishnamurti wasn't advocating for becoming a passive, irresponsible blob.
Right.
He was pointing to a way of being that is free from the constant chatter of the ego, free from the need to defend and protect this limited sense of self.
Yeah.
He believed that when we let go of this clinging to the me, we open ourselves up to a much vaster and more fulfilling way of experiencing life.
So it's not about erasing our personality or becoming some kind of empty shell.
Right.
It's about transcending the limitations of the ego and tapping into a deeper sense of self that's not bound by our thoughts and feelings.
You're getting it. It's about recognizing that who we truly are is far more expansive and mysterious than the me we've constructed in our minds.
Okay, my head is spinning a little bit.
Good.
But in a good way. This is some deep stuff. What did Krishnamurti have to say about living without will?
Yeah.
I kept coming across that phrase in the materials you sent.
Right.
And it felt connected to this whole idea of ending the self.
Krishnamurti believed that our will is often driven by desires, fears, and the need to control.
Okay.
This creates conflict both within ourselves and in our relationships with others. He suggested that it's possible to live without this kind of will, to act from a place of clarity and compassion, rather than from a need to impose our desires upon the world.
So instead of trying to force things to go our way,
Right.
it's about surrendering to a deeper intelligence that's guiding us.
Exactly. He believed that true freedom comes from letting go of our need to control and surrendering to the wisdom of life itself. It's a radical idea, but one that can lead to profound peace and fulfillment.
This all makes sense on a theoretical level, but how do we actually live this way? What did Krishnamurti say about the practical challenges of navigating daily life from this perspective?
He acknowledged that it's a challenging path, but he also offered insights into how we can navigate these challenges. He emphasized the importance of silent space and pure observation.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's delve into those ideas. What did he mean by silence and space, and how did they relate to the freedom and awareness he was talking about?
Krishnamurti distinguished between the forced silence of suppressing thoughts and the natural silence that arises when the mind is free from the chatter of the self.
Right.
He described this state by saying, then in that silence alone, that which is nameless is.
Okay.
He also talked about the importance of space, not just physical space, but
Right.
space within the mind.
So it's not about finding a quiet room to meditate in,
Right.
but about cultivating a spaciousness within the mind itself. Like creating a mental environment where thoughts can come and go without us getting caught up in them.
Exactly. It's about creating a mental space where we can observe our thoughts and feelings without getting swept away by them. He believed that in this spaciousness, a deeper intelligence can emerge.
Right.
An intelligence that's not limited by the ego's fears and desires.
And what about this idea of pure observation? I've heard that phrase before in relation to mindfulness. But how did Krishnamurti apply it?
For him, pure observation meant observing ourselves and the world without judgment, without interpretation, without the constant commentary of thought. He challenged us to see things as they are not as we wish they were or fear they might be.
So it's about seeing reality with fresh eyes, like we're experiencing it for the first time without all the baggage of our past experiences and opinions. That sounds pretty difficult.
It is. But Krishnamurti believed that this kind of pure observation is the key to understanding ourselves, our relationships, and the world around us. It's the foundation for living a life of true freedom and compassion.
Wow, this is a lot to take in. I can definitely see why Krishnamurti's teachings are both inspiring and challenging.
Right.
He's not offering easy answers, but he's inviting us to embark on a profound journey of self-discovery.
He was definitely a disruptor, challenging conventional wisdom and encouraging us to question everything we thought we knew about ourselves and the world.
I'm sensing this is just the beginning of our exploration. Stay tuned, listeners, as we continue our deep dive into the world of J. Krishnamurti. Okay, so we're back. And I have to admit, my mind is still buzzing from our last conversation about Krishnamurti's ideas on freedom and thought and that whole light unto oneself concept.
Yeah.
But there's another layer to this that I'm curious to explore. In the material you sent, he talks a lot about the nature of creation.
Right.
Not in a religious sense, but in a more fundamental way.
Krishnamurti wasn't interested in offering explanations about where we came from or how the universe began.
Right.
He was more concerned with how we perceive and understand the process of creation itself.
So he wasn't trying to answer the big "why are we here" question.
Right.
Instead, he was focusing on how our minds shape our experience of existence.
Exactly. He challenged us to look beyond our preconceived notions and cultural conditioning,
Right.
to see the act of creation as a continuous dynamic process that's happening right now in this very moment.
That's a pretty radical shift in perspective.
It is.
It's like he's saying that we're not just passive observers of creation,
Right.
but active participants.
You're getting it. And he believed that to truly understand creation, we need a mind that's free from limitations, a mind that's completely open and receptive.
Okay.
He emphasized the importance of space, not just the physical space around us,
Right.
but the space within our own minds.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. We talked about this mental space earlier in relation to meditation.
Yeah.
It's about creating a kind of spaciousness within ourselves where we can observe our thoughts and feelings without getting entangled in them.
Right.
But how does this relate to the idea of creation?
Krishnamurti believed that this inner spaciousness is essential for true understanding, for seeing things as they truly are. He even said, so space indicates emptiness, nothingness. And because there is not a thing put there by thought, that space has tremendous energy, so the brain must have the quality of complete freedom and space.
That's a powerful image. The idea that an empty mind, a mind free from the clutter of thought, is actually a mind full of energy and potential.
It is.
But most of us experience our minds as anything but empty. They're full of worries, to-do lists, and that song that's been stuck in our heads for days.
He acknowledged that our minds are often like a whirlwind of activity.
Right.
But he believed that by understanding the nature of thought, how it creates disorder and limits our freedom, we can begin to cultivate that inner silence and space that's essential for true creativity and understanding.
So it's not about forcing the mind to be quiet,
Right.
but about creating the conditions for silence to emerge naturally.
Yes.
And that silence, that spaciousness, is what allows us to tap into a deeper understanding of creation.
Yes. And he emphasized that this kind of silence is not a goal in itself,
Okay.
but rather a foundation for a truly meaningful life.
Right.
He described it this way: meditation is not an escape. It is not something mysterious. Out of meditation comes a life that is holy, a life that is sacred, and therefore you treat all things as sacred.
There's that idea of a sacred life again, which we touched on earlier. I'm really curious about what he meant by that. It's not about religious rituals or dogma, is it?
Not at all. He was pointing to a way of living that's rooted in a deep reverence for all of life.
Okay.
It's about seeing the interconnectedness of everything, appreciating the beauty and wonder of existence, and treating all beings with compassion and respect.
It sounds beautiful, but also incredibly challenging to live this way in a world that often feels so chaotic and divided.
He recognized that the world is full of suffering and conflict.
Right.
But he also believed that it's possible to live a sacred life, even in the midst of those challenges. He saw true transformation as an inner process, one that starts with understanding the nature of the self, the me that we often cling to so tightly.
Okay, let's talk about the self. We touched on this in our last conversation. Krishnamurti had some pretty radical ideas about the nature of the self, didn't he?
He did. He challenged the conventional notion of the self as a fixed, independent entity.
Right.
He argued that the me is actually an illusion,
Okay.
a construct created by our thoughts, memories, and desires.
I remember you saying that he saw the self as something that's created by thought.
Yeah.
But if the self isn't real, then who are we? What's left when we let go of that sense of me?
That's a question he encouraged us to explore for ourselves.
Okay.
He suggested that there's a deeper sense of self,
Okay.
one that's not limited by our thoughts and feelings, a self that's connected to something much vaster and more profound than our individual ego.
So it's not about annihilating the self,
Right.
but about transcending the limitations of the ego.
Exactly.
The small me that we often mistake for our true identity.
Exactly. He believed that when we can let go of the clinging to the me, when we can see through the illusion of the separate self, we open ourselves up to a much more expansive and fulfilling experience of life.
This is all starting to sound very abstract.
It is.
Can you give me a concrete example of what this might look like in everyday life?
Imagine you're in a heated argument with someone. You might be feeling angry, defensive, and completely convinced that you're right and they're wrong.
Yeah.
But what if you could step back from that intense emotion and simply observe the situation with more detachment?
Okay.
What if you could see the other person not as an enemy, but as another human being who's also struggling and trying to find their way?
I could see how that shifted perspective could completely change the dynamic of the interaction.
It can.
Instead of being caught up in the conflict, I might be able to see the situation with more clarity and compassion.
Exactly, and that's what Krishnamurti was pointing to. It's a shift from an ego-centered perspective to a more expansive, interconnected way of being. It's about recognizing that we're all part of a larger web of life and that our actions and choices have an impact on others.
This all ties back to his teachings on living without will, right?
Absolutely.
The idea that true freedom comes not from forcing our will upon the world, but from surrendering to a deeper intelligence.
Absolutely. Krishnamurti believed that much of our suffering arises from our attempts to control and manipulate the world around us, from our need to get what we want to be right, to avoid pain.
So true freedom comes from letting go of that need to control, from surrendering to the flow of life.
Yes. He believed that when we can surrender our will, we open ourselves up to a deeper wisdom and intelligence that flows through us and guides us toward a more harmonious and fulfilling life. He describes this process beautifully when he says, meditation is the understanding of life, which is to bring about order. Order is virtue, which is light. This light is not to be lit by another, however experienced, however clever, however erudite, however spiritual. Nobody on earth or in heaven can light that except yourself in your own understanding and meditation.
There's that light of the oneself idea again.
Yes.
It's like a golden thread that runs through all of his teachings. He's reminding us that true wisdom and understanding come from within, not from external sources.
You're right. He believed that we each have a unique inner compass that can guide us toward truth and freedom. But often that compass is obscured by the noise of our thoughts, our fears, and our conditioning.
One thing that strikes me about Krishnamurti is that he doesn't offer a step-by-step method for achieving this kind of inner transformation.
Right.
He doesn't give us a set of techniques to follow or a guru to worship. It's almost like he's challenging us to find our own way.
That's one of the things that makes him so unique. He didn't believe in dogma or systems.
Right.
He believed in the power of individual inquiry and self-discovery. He encouraged us to become our own teachers, to explore our inner landscape, and to discover our own path to truth. He's very clear about this when he says, to die to everything within oneself, for love is innocent and fresh, young and clear.
It's a radical approach, but also incredibly empowering. He's basically saying that we all have the potential to awaken to a deeper reality, but we have to do the work ourselves. No one can do it for us.
Exactly. He wasn't offering easy answers or shortcuts. He challenged us to take responsibility for our own awakening, to become active participants in our own transformation. He also emphasizes the importance of action when he says, meditation is the summation of all energy. Not the energy created by thought through friction, but the energy of a state of mind in which all conflict has completely ceased. The word religion probably means gathering together all your energy so that you can act diligently. A religious mind acts diligently, that is caring, watching, observing. In that observation, there is affection and passion.
I'm starting to see how all these seemingly disparate ideas fit together. He's calling us to cultivate a mind that is still spacious and attentive. And from this state of awareness, we can see the world with clarity and compassion, and our actions naturally flow from that place of understanding.
You're putting it beautifully. He believed that true transformation is an ongoing process, a journey of self-discovery that requires both inner work and engagement with the world. It's not about achieving a state of perfection, but about continuously learning, growing, and evolving.
I'm sensing a theme here of radical responsibility.
I agree.
He's not offering us a set of beliefs to cling to or a guru to follow blindly. He's saying that we have to do the work of waking up ourselves.
Absolutely. Krishnamurti challenged us to take ownership of our lives, to stop blaming others for our suffering, and to become the authors of our own destiny. He urges this self-reliance when he says, to find out if there is something that is not projected by thought, that is not an illusion, a myth, we must ask whether thought can be controlled, whether thought can be held in abeyance, whether thought can be suppressed, so that the mind is completely still.
So we begin by becoming aware of the nature of thought itself.
Right.
To see how it can create the illusion of a separate self and trap us in a limited experience of time.
Yes. He encouraged us to observe our thoughts without judgment, to notice the patterns and habits of our thinking, and to question everything we believe to be true.
It's like becoming a detective of our own minds, unraveling the mysteries of how we create our own reality.
That's a great way to put it. He believed by understanding the workings of our minds, we can begin to free ourselves from the limitations of our conditioning and awaken to a more expansive way of being. He highlights the potential of the mind when he says, the brain, which is so very old, which is extraordinarily capable, which has infinite capacities, has evolved through time, acquiring a great deal of experience knowledge. Can that brain that is so heavily conditioned and constantly wearing itself out rejuvenate itself? Can your brain unburden itself of continuity and discontinuity to begin totally anew? Can the brain become totally innocent?
Can the brain become innocent? That's such a beautiful and provocative question. But is it even possible? Our minds are so shaped by our experiences, our upbringing, our culture. Can we really unlearn all of that and see the world with fresh eyes?
Krishnamurti believed that it is possible, but it requires a radical shift in consciousness.
Okay.
It involves breaking free from the conditioning of the past,
Right.
letting go of the stories we tell ourselves about who we are,
Yeah.
and experiencing the world with a sense of childlike wonder and curiosity.
This is starting to sound like a process of unlearning, of letting go of everything we think we know. It's almost like hitting the reset button on our minds.
He was definitely challenging us to question everything we hold dear, to be willing to let go of even our most cherished beliefs if they no longer serve us. This includes the concept of self, as he mentions here. To go into this very deeply, you need to understand the nature of your consciousness. Your consciousness is its content. Without its content, it is not. The content makes up our consciousness. The content is our tradition, our anxiety, our name, our position. That is the content, and that is our consciousness. Can this whole consciousness, including the brain and the mind with all its content, realize its duration, and take one part of that consciousness, such as attachment, and end it voluntarily? That means you are breaking continuity.
Breaking continuity. That's a powerful image. It's like he's saying we have the power to rewrite the story of our lives. We can break free from the limitations of the past and create a new future, a future that's aligned with our truest selves.
Exactly. He believed that we have the power to transform ourselves to become more than the sum of our experiences, to awaken to a deeper reality that transcends the limitations of the ego.
I'm starting to see why Krishnamurti's teachings are both so inspiring and so challenging. He's offering us a glimpse of something truly profound, a vision of freedom and liberation that's available to each of us. But he's also reminding us that we have to do the work to get there.
He wasn't offering a quick fix or a magic formula. He was pointing to a path that requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to face ourselves with radical self-acceptance.
This deep dive is really taking us on a journey. I'm so curious to see where it leads us next. What else does Krishnamurti have to say about how we can live these teachings in the world? How do we take these radical ideas about the self-freedom and the nature of reality and apply them towards everyday lives?
That's a great question, and one that we'll explore in our next conversation. Stay tuned, listeners, as we continue our deep dive into the world of J. Krishnamurti.
All right, we've journeyed deep into Krishnamurti's thoughts on freedom and meditation, the nature of reality, and even touched on the idea of living a sacred life.
Yeah.
But I'm left wondering, how do we take all of this heady stuff and actually apply it to our messy everyday lives?
Right.
Did Krishnamurti offer any guidance on bridging that gap?
Krishnamurti was very clear that his teachings weren't meant to be abstract philosophies or intellectual exercises. He believed that real understanding had to be lived.
Okay.
Had to be expressed in our actions, our relationships, and how we engaged with the world around us.
So he wasn't advocating for retreating to a cave and meditating for the rest of our lives. It seems like he wanted us to be in the world but not be consumed by it.
You're exactly right. He wasn't encouraging withdrawal or escapism.
Okay.
He challenged us to be fully present and engaged in the world, but to not get caught up in the drama, conflicts, and illusions that often drive our actions. He described this delicate balance by saying, how can the mind know if it has found what it calls the ultimate, the immeasurable, the nameless, the most sublime? As it cannot possibly know that which is limitless, unknowable, that which cannot possibly be experienced, all the mind can do is to free itself from all categories of pain, anxiety, fear, and the desire that ultimately creates illusion.
So how do we bridge that gap between profound insight and practical living? How do we take these concepts of self-awareness, freedom from thought and inner silence, and actually apply them in a world that often feels chaotic and demanding?
Krishnamurti emphasized the importance of relationships as a key to this transformation.
Okay.
He saw our relationships with others as a mirror, reflecting back to us our own patterns, conditioning, and areas where we need to grow.
So it's not about avoiding relationships or trying to achieve some kind of isolated enlightenment. Instead, we use our interactions with others as opportunities for self-discovery and growth.
Exactly. He believed that genuine transformation happens in relationship, in the way we communicate, in the way we handle conflicts, and in the way we love.
I recall Krishnamurti having strong opinions about love, especially the idea that attachment isn't true love. Can you unpack that a bit?
He made a clear distinction between love and attachment.
Okay.
He saw attachment as a form of possessiveness, a need to control another person or cling to them for our own sense of security or fulfillment. In contrast, he believed that true love was a state of being that's free from this neediness, a kind of unconditional acceptance and care for another person.
That makes sense, but it's also challenging, isn't it? Can we truly be responsible without being attached? Can we deeply care for others without needing them to fulfill us in some way?
That's the paradox and the challenge that Krishnamurti invites us to explore. He suggests that true responsibility arises from a deep understanding of interconnectedness, from recognizing that we are all part of a larger web of life. When we see ourselves in others, when we understand that their well-being is ultimately our own, then compassionate action naturally arises. He speaks about this need for understanding and action here. To inquire into truth, one must gather all energy. One must have the capacity to be diligent so as not to act according to a pattern, but observe one's thoughts, feelings, antagonisms, fears, and go far beyond them so that the mind is completely free.
I'm noticing a recurring theme in Krishnamurti's teachings, the importance of letting go of control, letting go of attachment, letting go of the need to be right, even letting go of the idea of a separate self. It's like he's saying that true freedom and happiness come from a deep surrender to what is.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
He suggests that when we surrender to the present moment, when we let go of our need to control and manipulate, we open ourselves up to a deeper wisdom, a wisdom that's not limited by the fears and desires of the ego. He captures this beautifully when he says, meditation is the sense of total comprehension of the whole of life, and from that there is right action. Meditation is absolute silence of the mind. Not relative silence or the silence that thought has projected and structured, but the silence of order, which is freedom. Only in that total, complete, unadulterated silence is that which is truth, which is from everlasting to everlasting.
It's a radical idea, but it also feels incredibly liberating. It's like we're being asked to trust in something bigger than ourselves, to trust in the wisdom of life itself.
Exactly. Krishnamurti encourages us to trust in the process of life, to surrender to the unknown, and to allow a deeper intelligence to guide our steps.
This deep dive has been truly eye-opening. We've explored so many facets of Krishnamurti's teachings, but if we could distill all of this down to one essential takeaway, what would it be?
If there's one thing Krishnamurti invites us to do, it's to become aware.
Okay.
To become aware of our thoughts, our feelings, our patterns of behavior, our conditioning. To become aware of the illusions we create, the stories we tell ourselves, and the limitations we impose on ourselves. He points to this when he says, to die to everything that one knows. Have you ever tried it? To be free from the known, to be free from your memory, even for a few days to be.
To be present, to be fully here now in this moment, without the baggage of the past or the anxieties of the future. It seems like true freedom, according to Krishnamurti, lies in this present moment awareness.
You got it. He believed that in the present moment, in a state of pure observation, we can access a deeper intelligence, a wisdom that transcends the limitations of thought and opens us up to a richer, more fulfilling way of being.
So for you listening, what stands out from this deep dive? What resonates with you? What challenges you? What sparks your curiosity? We encourage you to take some time to reflect on these questions and see what insights emerge.
And we'll leave you with a final thought inspired by Krishnamurti's teachings. If you were to be a light unto yourself, what kind of light would you be? How would it illuminate your life and the lives of those around you?
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of J. Krishnamurti. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep awakening.